right, Dennis Tirch. Good to see you.
Hello.
Last time I ran into you was in the, I guess it was just the big waiting area. You were waiting to go get dinner. I was waiting to meet somebody for dinner at the ACVS conference. And then I was like, oh, there's Dennis Tirch. Like he's a brother from another mother. Even though we had
Yeah,
so few conversations, I feel so connected to the work that you do and feel so aligned with it. So I was like, let's have a conversation on this podcast. Let's reconnect in that way. So I'm glad to have you here.
that's great. I have a similar feeling. It was sort of like, oh, like a long lost friend. Like, oh, we've got to catch up, you know. And there's so much that you're doing that's so exciting and so aligned, as you say. So it's great to be able to talk.
Yeah. And you really sit at this intersection of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and compassion focused therapy. Actually, you came to ACT through CFT, right? Was it CFT your original home, or
You know, my
did you come?
original home was,
Yeah.
uh, well, first the Dharma and then Becky and cognitive therapy. I was the associate director of the American Institute for Cognitive Therapy with Bob Leahy, and very close to the Beck Institute. And
Oh, wow. You're a cognitive guy. How you got here through cognitive therapy? My goodness.
yeah, I was
We
doing it
demonize them.
wrong. You know, the thing is, the really great cognitive therapists are very similar to ACT therapists or humanistic therapists in that they like really can connect and help someone shift perspective. And as a Buddhist cognitive therapist, I was kind of doing it wrong. And when you do it wrong, it looks a lot more like ACT. In that you're not working on cognitive change so much. You're kind of like just wanting people to like soften around their experience of thinking in the first place and kind of like get out from uh, under the influence of that. And Vajrayana Buddhism has such an emphasis on imagery and compassion work. And through that place, I got to know Steve Hayes and Kelly Wilson and Paul Gilbert and Kristen Neff. And it just, you know, the first 20 years of this century were like this beautiful, and they continue to be this beautiful, like fertile time to explore new ways that people can wake up and be empowered.
hmm Well, I remember viscerally a meditation that you led. This was over, I don't know how long ago it was, the NIAC first annual
Oh,
Compassionate
yeah.
Mind event. How long ago was that?
Oh, my.
Five?
That was probably 12 years ago.
Oh my gosh, I was about to say 5 years ago. Okay, double that plus some. And you know how you can remember when something is so emotionally evocative, you can remember it at a very visceral um, level. And I remember you leading us through this meditation, which was about following ourselves up to the moment of now and then landing in the now and sort of what is here now in the room. You probably could tell me
Yeah.
more of what you did there. And it was so powerful to me because here we are, a bunch of researchers and therapists and all sorts of folks coming together in New York, your hometown. You're putting on this conference. I didn't know who Dennis Tirch was, but you were sort of the main guy,
Ah,
and it was so beautiful. And I was like, this guy's got something deeper than act and compassion focused stuff. He's got some Buddhism in him, clearly. So it was beautiful. I still remember it.
oh, I'm
It was
so
good.
glad that you remember that. And now I'm thinking you're probably more accurate in the time. How many people were at that event, would you say? Was
Oh,
it in a large space?
50. Kelly was
Okay, yeah,
there.
no. So that was about 6 years ago. We
Okay.
had one in like in an office conference room that
Oh,
was 12
yeah.
years ago. That was in Nyack, and I thought that was the one. So pardon me for that. But now that you mentioned that meditation, I remember that was a really beautiful group of people, a real beautiful moment. It was something that was really shared, you know?
hmm Yeah. A bunch of the main players, Marcela Matos, beautiful people. So you're taking this combination of ACT and compassion focused approaches. You're blending them in a beautiful way, and now you're interested in applying it to performance. And you said investing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, the way your path just sort of sometimes presents itself to you. And um, over the last 25 years, but particularly the last 15 years, a lot of the clients who've asked me to work with them are people who work in leadership roles in finance, in hedge funds and in venture capital and in other areas. It was never something that I sought out, although if I'd thought to, I might have. I mean, it's a great group of people, and people who are really dedicated and who are really often disciplined, and to some extent probably pre-selected because they're looking for mindfulness and compassion. And what I've seen over that time is this interesting premise, which I'm interested in your take on, Diana, which is that when someone orients their mind and awakens and cultivates states of embodied wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, and then like lives from that place, it actually contributes greatly to their effectiveness and their ability to access peak performance at work, in relationships, and I think particularly around investments, because you really have to face the balance between emotions and analysis and effort, and show up for that kind of decision making process in a very very specific way for it to work.
Yes, and what I've experienced with just clients in that arena is that you're also stepping onto a roller coaster with investments. So if you are up on every up and down on every down, you're in for a very unhappy ride.
Oh yeah.
That the sort of the rise and fall of the ego, or the rise and fall of happiness, or the rise and fall of your worth can be really problematic for folks. They get burned out by it, they get exhausted by it, but they're often left asking, okay, what more? Like, how do I find a ground in all of this? And then also, what is guiding, what are the guiding principles behind how and why I am moving money around in this way? I mean, money is just another form of energy. I see money as a transmission of energy.
Mm.
So that way in which we use our money, or put our, and that's why it's so great to have people like you that are working with investors, because you're helping guide people to a place of compassionate action in the arena of wise livelihood, money, how we're using it, how we're applying
Yeah,
it.
I love that way you're describing that. And wise can mean so many things, and yet it always means discernment and appreciation of what is and what is not, and the reality of being, and how to work like in an open and wholehearted way with effectiveness. And what I've seen is the psychological flexibility model from ACT, the cultivation of like groundedness and compassionate courage and balance from compassion work and CFT, and the sort of one pointed commitment and concentration of Zen. That three-legged stool can allow someone to be in the presence of these really uh, potentially tyrannical or repertoire narrowing experiences, like a market drawdown or like exuberance and chasing after momentum, that when people can really work with themselves, um, it opens up new possibilities for success, but also, as you suggest, for meaning and for a sense of what you're doing this in the service of. And that's all, to me, it's just really exciting and really inspiring to be a part of that process.
Okay, let's unpack that three-legged stool because I like it. I'm going to go leg number two,
Okay.
compassion, because you gave a keynote. I think this was you. I'm going to give you credit for it,
Okay.
where you said the hexaflex should have 7 points to it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you were like, and the seventh one is compassion. And then Steve was like, well, compassion's infused in all of the other 6. We're talking about the hexaflex of ACT, but it does deserve its own little point and make it the heptaflex. So
Yeah.
compassion is part of this three-legged stool. And if somebody is listening that's wanting more wise effort in their livelihood, wise effort in their investing, um, how does compassion play a role? And then what would you do with them? Like if they were in your office and they were struggling with, how to use their money or how to tackle their work, what would be the practices you
Boy, these are
work
really,
with?
that's such an awesome way you map that out. The question just maps out really, really precisely. So, one of the things for us to think about together is, and this is stuff that you're familiar with, and some of our listeners will be. But it's when I first learned these things, they were kind of revolutionary to me, even as a psychologist. Is that our experience? Let's start with a definition of compassion. So it's in our framework, it is a sensitivity to the presence of suffering in ourself or others, coupled with a wish and an effort and a dedication to do something, to take action, to alleviate or prevent that suffering. And you can extend that in a way to be something closer to flourishing and loving kindness and like wishing the best for people, not just karuna, as they say in the the sort of four immeasurables, not just a sensitivity to suffering, but a sensitivity to what is helpful and not harmful, and what allows people to experience sort of their best selves. And that flows from an experience of interconnectedness experientially, right? We all know people who've done some contemplative work or people who are devoted in some way to something in their life. We know that like dissolving experience of self when we're working towards something that is bigger than ourselves. It's a sort of a extremely moving, almost hard to put into words kind of state of flow and peak performance. And because human evolution is based on the necessity for cooperation and caring so much. We're such a fragile species with such a low birth rate, and we need each other so much. And anyone who is a parent or an aunt or an uncle or a guardian or just to spend time around kids, we realize that they are stabilized and grounded and they deal with excessive experiences of threat or overexcitement by turning to someone they love who activates a sense of emotional safeness and groundedness. And that's how emotion regulation works in humans. And so, what that means is that excessive threat, or excessive drive based, like over focus, so wrapped up in what we want, those, in terms of evolution, those are repertoire narrowing states, right? They cause us to only focus on the threat. We're having a lovely chat. If there was a rattlesnake in the room, it wouldn't be. We would pay attention to that first before the podcast continued, or in this case, a bear. Our attention goes to fear. And if you all of a sudden got a phone call and you said, "Oh wow, I was just given $100 million grant just now," that might distract you from this conversation, even with all the mental training that one does, because that's how we work. That's how we operate. But there is a superordinate way of being that enlightenment traditions have always known is a part of waking up and being our best selves, which is the experience of loving awareness, interconnectedness, and compassion. And when that's leveraged, our brains function like securely attached brains. And all of the qualities that are present in secure attachment are the self same qualities that you see in psychological flexibility. So when we look at this behavioral technology of cultivating the ability to contact the present moment, get unhooked from your stories, flow with difficult states of mind and body, and be committed to taking valued action, all that technology from behavioral science and ACT kind of grafts really beautifully onto the science of compassion and contemplative practices for compassion, and pairs very nicely. I know I'm kind of hitting on all of these three legs of the stool, so sorry about this, but it gets to that focus. So I think when you hear about compassion and investing, it almost could sound like, why? How would that relate? But when you think about organizing your mind to be as brave and as wise and as strong and as flexible as you can be, and having that on demand, and then facing business challenges, it all sorts, for me, it just all kind of really comes together.
Okay, so this is an important distinction. When you're talking about compassion and investing, you're not necessarily saying, okay, that means you need to invest all your money into starving families and wherever. What you're saying is, I want you to have the most optimal mind, brain, body state possible to make wise investing decisions. And that when you are activating your compassion system, when you're in that securely attached place, it is like, a child that feels really safe and can go play and create freely, or an artist that feels really safe and co-create or write a poem or play a piece of music without that closing down. I mean, you said the thing that might distract you is like if a bear or a rattlesnake came in the room. What may actually distract me is not a bear or rattlesnake. It would be me being in the hierarchy with Dr. Dennis Tirch, where all of a sudden I put you in a position of
Yeah.
power and myself in a submissive position that I need to like prove myself in some way, or I'm afraid of what you're going to think, or I'm going to
Sure.
say something that's wrong because you're the expert on compassion. And when I do all of that, it would really narrow my repertoire of how I show up fully and authentically in the present. Now, because we've had experiences in the past, that meditation, the first time I met you, the kind, warm voice and just experience of you that's even like nonverbal,
Hmm.
that I feel safe around you. It activates my compassion system. So therefore, I can enter into this conversation more freely. And that's how we want people to show up in the workplace. Because if you're driven by threat or you're driven by drive, it is something else that's directing your behavior, not your wisest self.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really well encapsulated. And I love that like related experiential example because we can respond as you know, and as a lot of our listeners know, and some of them even just hearing this will remind you of something you didn't even know you know, is that we respond to real threats and we respond to imaginary threats. And we respond to physical threat and we respond to social threat. So this is I could kind of right back at you, Diana. Like you are so wise, and you embody compassion and wisdom and grace, and you're bringing it to people in a way that is super effective and super admirable. And you're asking me, hey, uh, we have a sandbox together. We're going to play in the sandbox. You didn't, if it's okay to say this, you didn't say like, hey, we need to talk about this topic or what's your latest research. You were interested in what excites me now, what I'm working on that is lights a fire under me. You're creating an emotionally safe environment just in the way that you described. And that works to downregulate our threat processing. It works to increase parasympathetic nervous system engagement, psychological flexibility. And it's when you said it's not just the verbal, I think it's really that's an unlock because it's something you embody. And the breath practices, the yogic practices that you're so, like really adept at and that you share so well, and those movement practices, breath practices, music, kirtan, art, and our self talk and the way we speak with others, our personal conduct, they all determine what sort of archetypal algorithms we are embodying. And we can embody a brassy, greedy, aggressive one, or we could embody a very overly cautious, risk averse one, or we could embody the one that's afraid of airplanes or like plane phobic. But when we embody that like inner bodhisattva, that inner bodhisattva warrior with all of the wisdom that is there, when we connect with our the most caring, strong, I'm thinking of my, like immigrant grandmother, like, like a force of nature, so strong, so caring, so loving. It's almost impossible to imagine. But when I connect with that and I embody it and I let myself embody it, when you let yourself embody it, it's kind of more like a transmission than it is a teaching or a lecture or a psychotherapy session. It's like we're sharing a state of being with someone.
Okay. So tell me about your immigrant grandmother. What were the qualities that she embodied that you want to embody? Like, how did she hold her body? What was it about her?
She kind of, this is, I mean this literally, that she kind of looked like the Dalai Lama, like as only as the Dalai. She had this big smile
Uh-huh.
and a similar kind of shape in her face, and
Uh-huh.
quite frankly, similar eyeglass frames. And she just was so peaceful and so graceful and so funny, had that same kind of laugh that His Holiness kind of has, and like, and also similarly, now that I think of it, um, had just been through hell. Just been
Mhm.
through like absolute hell, lost both of her parents when she was a little girl, including her mom, who was murdered, as it turns out. We didn't know that until I was talking to her when I was in my 30s. And she just sort of said, first time she told anyone in the family that. And raised, in the Depression, like uh, no money, eventually raised by her sisters, became a hairdresser, went to New York from Hackensack, New Jersey, supported herself, got an apartment, eventually met my grandfather. She has pictures of her out during World War II, like dancing in those kind of like Andrew's sisters' outfits. And she lost one of her daughters. My mom's sister died from leukemia in childbirth. She had so many other tragedies, so many difficult things, buried her sisters who raised her, and she was fine with it all. She could have a sadness, she could have her anger, she could have her sorrow, she could have her joy, but she was radically accepting, like a wisdom of, this is the life I have. This is where I am. What am I going to do right now? Am I going to dye my friend's hair? Am I going to go to the bingo? Am I going to play with my grandkids? Am I going to make dinner? Am I going to paint the dining room? All of those things. And if you asked her, there was no hiding from any of the tragedies. She didn't talk herself out of what she felt, but she was resilient and strong. And all of that, I'm absolutely sure, flowed from her loving nature, her love of her children, her grandchildren, her family, her friends, and quite frankly, of herself. She actually really, I think she loved herself a lot. I think she cared for herself a great deal. And that to me is just such a great teaching.
Yeah. So if you were an investor, right, you may, and that investor, or maybe if there was an investor in your practice and you tapped into their immigrant grandmother and they started saying all those things, they've known compassion, right? They've known those qualities. I can tell you're highlighting them because they are the qualities of a compassionate being, and it doesn't have to be Mother Mary or the Buddha or Mother Teresa, which is what we think about. We think about these like figures, Gandhi, but we can just
Yeah.
go straight to, okay, but where have you seen or known or experienced a model of compassion? And then as we talk about that model of compassion, as you envision it, your nervous system is starting to change as you're talking about your grandma. You could talk about your grandma all day because it's such a sweet spot, sweet, lovely soup to sit in of resilience and strength. And she's been through hardships. So that component of known suffering, but done something about it, of, in terms of compassion. And it feels odd, but that's actually the work that we need to do in our work, is we need to know it somewhere else so then we can embody it and live it in our practice, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And you're really reflecting some of the intimate understanding of how we're practicing being the version of ourself that we wish to be. And we're leveraging that system to respond to imagination with our bodies and our minds and our behavior, as if those imaginary things were real. So, you've heard this example before, and you've used it probably in teaching. Like, you think about your favorite food, you get hungry. You think about a scary memory, you have some of those emotions. But if you allow yourself to awaken that motivational system, that compassionate, caring system, it organizes your nervous system and your body and your hormonal systems around that kind of strength and that kind of care. Um, I think on a one-to-one basis, when you're working with someone, that's why the initial discussions, like, and for those of you who aren't therapists but you've been in therapy, like the first session or two, sometimes it seems like you're doing all the talking, and it's like the therapist is asking a lot of questions about your personal history and stuff, or the coach, because a lot of the stuff I do now is coaching.
Yeah.
So you, during that listening, if the coach or the therapist is really on top of their game, they're doing two things. They're walking and chewing gum at the same time, right? They're relating, they're embodying secure attachment, they're listening, they're relating to you in a way that starts to build up a shared capacity to bring online compassion, care, and groundedness and emotional safeness. And they're listening for the active processes that we know we can train for more effective action. So it's like being a really great coach of like soccer for your daughter or something like that. Part of what she's doing is she's learning how to play soccer. And the other thing she's learning is how to feel strong and safe and loved and secure when she gets overexcited or when she gets overly scared. And that's what's happening in the early coaching sessions when you're starting to map out a shared case formulation. So you're like, this is an interesting one, Diana. Like, it's a little inside baseball too, like talking shop, but this lets us work from the top down or from the bottom up. Like, you can embody it. And then these qualities of contacting the present moment and freedom of action and clarity of understanding, they emerge from the embodied state of wisdom. And then you can also like find where your strengths and your weaknesses are, in the ACT model or the 7 factors of the enlightened mind or the eightfold path. It's like, where am I strong and where do I need to still develop? So if you're Michael Jordan and you're working on your outside shot, even though you're the best basketball player, but you're going to work on your outside shot, or you're someone who can really tolerate a lot of distress, but you believe your mind when it tells you a whole lot of bunk. And it's like, oh, I'm going to work on defusing and decentering from these cognitions, but I'm really good at like being an observer of my states of body. So it
These
gives us lots of options with our clients and with ourselves.
and these days, what I'm working a lot on with as well. So it's where am I strong? Where do I want to continue to work on? But also generalization. Where am I strong in some context, but then in another context, that strength just is like eludes me. I can do it at work all day long, but as soon as I get home to my family, I lose it. Or I can do it with my mom all day long, but as soon as I get to my sister, it's gone. So that generalization of these processes, and by processes, what we're talking about is exactly what we're talking about, the process of compassion. Can you be the embodiment of your grandmother, the resilient grandmother that's like, I'm just moving through life, painting the porch. And can you do that in some contexts, but other contexts, it unravels. And what's happening there, and how can we bring your grandmother energy online in that context? What do you need to translate it where you need it? That's a real beautiful thing, because if we're tracking in session what our clients are doing in the context of therapy, we have one sliver, one slice. So in the context of therapy, if you have that strong therapeutic relation, maybe they're even sharing with you in vulnerable ways that they don't share with anybody, including their own partners. Like, I will have clients who've been married for 20 years and they'll be telling stuff to me that they don't tell their own wife. And I'm like, wait a minute here.
Sure.
Like, yeah, I've known you for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So what's happening in here? What is the context of this that will help us understand other contexts and how you become either psychologically inflexible or have difficulty contacting compassion? Or one focus, Zen.
This is really, I really love what you're doing there. And this is not just a mutual praise society, but if it is, that's great too. I don't care. That's fine. But it's very genuine, because you're talking about a very overlooked part of therapy, which is what happens in the actual session as training that can generalize into other dimensions on someone's life. And also, even beyond that, how like this sort of not just effort, but wise effort and wise concentration, wise mindfulness, those dimensions of being will allow you to generalize from one area of your life to another. And that, I'm kind of counting on that. The thing I'm betting on here, and so far it's really come to pass, is that when people achieve their goals and live their values by accessing the kind of power of their compassion and their loving kindness and their wisdom and their courage, that gradually but inevitably, to quote like I'm stealing that quote from Krishna Das, who stole it from someone else, but he always gets the quotation correct. Gradually but inevitably, something happens which kind of like just pours through the other dimensions of someone's life, and like grace and strength radiates into other domains of life, and then that radiates into others. And I think you're really nailing that process, you know. So it makes me even more excited to dive deeper into your book and such like that.
Well, I'm curious about for you in your own work, this three-legged stool, how the legs show up for you, how they get a little wobbly sometimes. In writing, you're writing a book on this. It's not going to be out forever, folks, but it will come out at some point.
Yeah.
And in this, this application for yourself. I mean, looking at wise effort at work in your own life. We got to go there, Dennis. I always go
I
there.
will.
Sorry.
No, I totally think I think that's really effective and really helpful. I'm trying to find the right way to talk about two terms from Dogen and from Zen,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Ipon Gujen and Juhoi. And to me, they also relate to a lot of other things I've read from the Stoics. I've read, in Marcus Aurelius or in Longchenpa and other Tibetan sources. And but with all these foreign sounding, if you're in America or Europe, you're an English speaker, it sounds foreign. Won't sounds foreign to somebody who's speaking Japanese or whatever. But they are still kind of foreign concepts. And all these names of philosophers, there's something really simple underneath them, but that's very elusive. Ju has a term which means a dharma position, but dharma, beyond it meaning like another word for Buddhism or whatever it means, it's like the way things are
The
in the
truth,
world,
the
the way,
teachings.
the truth, the
Yeah.
reality of being,
Mm-hmm.
So establishing a groundedness in your understanding of the reality of being and abiding in that through your meditative practice and saying like, this is what matters to me, like this is what I am about, this is the way I see the world, and this is how I wish to be in the world, and I am committed to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then training not just in that sort of wide angle lens mindfulness meditation, which is a beautiful practice, but in the kind of rigorous concentration meditation and working with jhanas and working with those states of one pointedness of concentration, with this rigorous returning and again to the breath or to silence or to practicing cello or, working with a brush or a rigorous athletic process or yoga process. You're returning again and again so that you can cultivate, of course, flexible, but very focused attention and awareness. And so you're not just like, oh, the leaves on a stream or your thoughts. That's a groovy one. I like
Mm-hmm.
that. It helps me all the time. But the time that I've spent really being rigorous with myself and coming back to groundedness in presence through concentration, that form of mindfulness, that's somewhat underemphasized, I think, in Western psychology, form of mindfulness, arguably, where you're really focused, really concentrated. I think that has a unique ability to not suppress negative thoughts, but it kind of obviates their influence altogether. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, the concentration practices, it's so interesting because now I'm getting all into Maha-mudra, which is we start with concentration, but then we open the field of awareness to being backlit by just a field of loving awareness in which we just relax into, and there is actually no concentration. So it's an interesting
Yeah.
phenomena, but we start with, and I was studying some of Dan Brown's work. So that we start with the concentration practices of you get really diligent on following the breath. And so Dan Brown is this, he's a psychologist at Harvard that did a lot of translation of Tibetan texts. And in his early teachings, he wants you to get to like 80-90% concentration in your meditation. So he had you meditate for like 10 minutes until you can get to the point where you're following your breath without leaving for 80 to 90%. That is high level concentration. That is super high. And that's what he calls it, or in some of these Tibetan practices, so that's the rope of awareness. That's the
Yeah.
rope that you are connected to, that you can always come back to, that you're grounded in. And then you lean back into the spacious, loving awareness that's just holding it all. And that's effortless mindfulness. So it's an interesting paradox because
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
I'm a believer in both. I need the concentration practices. I especially need them because of my tendency towards addictive types of behavior. That I need a center. I need something to go to. I need
Mm-hmm.
to. Okay, I'm freaking out here. I am about to lose my whatever recovery or my shit, and I need a rope of mindfulness. But then I need to let go a little bit of that effortful concentration too. And
Oh yeah, that's beautiful, and I'm so happy that you're emphasizing it in the Zen traditions that I've been a part of. You kind of begin with zazen, and it has that more rigorous kind of focused
yeah,
kind of concentration.
don't move on your seat.
Yeah, yeah. I'll never forget in 1990, Edo Shimano Roshi was like sitting with his group for the first time, and somebody swallowed, and I heard, "Be quiet!" Like from the front of the room. I was like, "Whoa, this is so intense." Now, most Zen is not like that. Most Zen isn't like that. But there's a rigor, and then what you're describing so beautifully is when you move from zazen into shikantaza and this just sitting kind of practice, when you realize this is your natural state, that the Buddha nature, the awakened nature is your natural state, you're connecting with something that is effortless and spacious and has this beautiful interiority and this quality of like groundedness and lightness and intimacy and working distance. Could I just tell you a little tiny example? It's the most banal, silly example, but it was a moment where I was like, after like, I don't know, 30 years of Zen stuff, I'm like, oh, okay. Like there was a brief period just before the pandemic that I was running a Zen center for my teacher here when I became a Dharma holder and he's moved away. And there's this like group of people who I really respected. They were senior to me. I was like 50 and they're in their 70s. And I rented this one room schoolhouse in Palisades and that's our Zendo. And it's the first day and there's all these like septuagenarians and octogenarians in gray robes waiting to go sit inside, and they forgot to give me the key,
Mm-hmm.
the people I rented it from. And my mind started to whirl. What are you going to do? They don't need to be standing out here, the whole thing. And I looked over at the window and I noticed its height. And then I looked over and I saw like a garbage can. And I realized if I put the garbage can in front of the window, I could step up onto it, crack the window open slightly, and roll onto the floor. And the next thing I know, I had done that. There was no thinking, there wasn't ruminating, there wasn't worrying about it. And then I opened the door and let everyone in. And they said, "What just happened?" And it wasn't until after it was over that I realized I had this extreme freedom of action without extraneous thought, without worry, without fear, just looking at a situation, totally immersed in what needed to happen next, doing it. And I was like, oh, that's what we're talking about all these years. You see something, you flow into the context, you do what is needed, and you're unencumbered, unencumbered. The mind is no impediment. You're just flowing with right action. And since then, I've noticed that, you can notice it as a therapist sometimes, where you're just responding very naturally, very lovingly to what the person needs when we're really in our flow state. And I think that that third leg of the stool, that like cultivating concentration, just as you beautifully described in the Dzogchen and Maha-mudra thing, it's a doorway, it's a gateway to a whole level of ease that's on the other side of being able to really focus.
Mm. I love that the concentration practices are the doorway. The concentration practices are they help you find the door. They help you find the window to get through and do the roll
Yeah.
into, and then it's effortless once you have that practice in place. And so if we apply that to our work setting, we really do need the concentration practices because happening for people is their concentration is so scattered, it's so pulled in so many different directions, they don't have one pointedness, or they feel like it's one pointed in the wrong way. It's like I got concentration, but it's not on the things that I want to be concentrating on. So there is a deliberate, sort of, as you mentioned before, this sort of like ability to discern where is it that you want to put that focus. And sometimes that aperture gets focusing requires both expansion and contraction, right? When you focus a camera, sometimes you're focusing way in, on something as detailed as your breath, sometimes with that camera focus, you're focusing way out on feeling the room, your team that you're working with, the energy of the space, what's needed in this moment. That's an expansive focus. But those are both concentration practices that you cultivate. You can cultivate through meditation. You can cultivate through eyes open in whatever situation you're in. But then they allow for, once you have that practice in place, some of the effortless action. If you just do the right thing, because you're in that right mode, you've set that path up for
Yeah,
yourself.
that's really, really on it. That is really cooking with gas, and there's like, I love these discussions when we get the opportunity to chat in even in the context of a podcast, in the context of the work, because these things are going through my mind. I'll be writing down later and thinking about, there's like, it suggests to me the way like choiceless awareness can blend into like choice of where you put your awareness. And then that can lead to like a resting and choiceless awareness. And the same way that like, I always bristle, with all loving respect to Chris Germer and Kristen Neff. I love their stuff, but self-compassion, the word self kind of always grates
Oh yeah.
on my ear. And then I'm like, wait, but the self-compassion leads to selflessness. And like all in the Bhagavad Gita, it's the text for selflessness and nonviolence. And it's also about a war, so these things kind of, I saw you were responding to the self-compassion. I'd love to hear
Oh,
your,
because Dennis, I wrote a book, the Self Compassion Daily Journal, and I battled so hard. I do not want to call it the Self
there
Compassion
you go.
Journal. I want to call it the Compassion Journal. It was full of CFT. It was full of, yes, a focus on inner compassion, so that then we have the capacity to enter into the flow of compassion. I mean, this is what I've learned from you. This is what I've learned from Paul Gilbert, the flow of compassion. This is what I've learned
Yeah.
from Ty, that it is not about the self, and that the larger self has no self in it. It's empty of self. So I battled, but I lost the battle. They were like, sorry. If they said that if I wanted to call it the Compassion Daily Journal, I had written the whole book. You're going to have to pull the book and you're going to have to repitch it to us. And we don't think it has legs in this market. Self
News.
is what sells.
See, this is Skillful Means, and that was a good book. I like that book.
Yeah,
People
it's a good
can
book.
read that book. I had a similar situation with that same publisher,
Sorry.
and I didn't finish the book. No, it's okay. Like
Yeah.
they wanted me to write a book which was on compassion and courage differently after
Uh-huh.
several iterations, and I kind of said, and it was very amicable. It was like a Gwyneth Paltrow would approve of the conscious uncoupling. It was like, well,
Yeah,
then
totally.
that this book doesn't need to be written. Then uh, go be well. Like that's cool. Like I'll use this material elsewhere.
Yeah. This is
And
wise effort at work though, right? I mean, when I went with the book, I was like, okay, the cover's the gateway drug. It'll get you in,
yeah,
but then once you read it, you'll be in the flow and you won't be able to help yourself, but practice acts of compassion and receive compassion, the flow, the three-way flow. But that's wise effort at work. That's the one pointedness. What is your purpose here?
yeah.
And are you getting in the way of your own purpose, either by taking the book or not taking the book? It doesn't really matter which action
No,
you
I
take.
think you're very clear. I mean, part of me is like, wow, I could have used a little more wise effort work and written the book. But at the same time, I think you're right. The outcome isn't as important as embodying the principles, like becoming something bigger than yourself,
Yeah,
and however you do it.
yeah. Yeah, but I'm you got my little sore spot there around the word self compassion, and I embrace it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so
That's the
it
parable
is,
of the burning house too, right? Like, people, you can't feed people things that they're not prepared to eat. And that also relates to working with people in business. I would not be, I really mean this. This sounds, I respect what my clients do, my coaching clients. I admire it. I won't work with people who, like, if I don't respect what they're about. It's just there's lots of people they could work with. They don't need to work with me. Right. But in that frame, it means a lot to me that if they begin with how to be a better investor, that they end with like how to be who they really are. How they can be a loving, connected presence and a channel for something, that a channel for grace. You know, that's not. on everybody's, plan officially, explicitly, but implicitly, I think we can get there. I think we can get there by overcoming greed and fear and overcoming, self-limiting views and overcoming ourselves. And interestingly, even in publishing, even in writing, even in business, the opportunities are there for us to have that kind of transformational journey.
Okay, you said something there that what's going to blow many psychologists and therapists' mind, which this is, I don't work with people if I'm not about what they're about, or if I'm not, in support of what their mission is, what their offering is.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna back them. Is this true? Yeah.
Oh
Or
yeah,
what's the,
sure. I
yeah.
mean, it's a pretty broad set of criteria.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it makes
Yeah.
it. I don't want to self-lionize that or
Yeah. Yeah.
seem super judgy. It's just sort of like a certain basic human respect, and like if I could get behind. And also, by the way, this is more true of coaching clients than clinical
Coaching, yeah,
clients.
then therapy, right? Therapy, we're gonna
Like
take in the
clinical,
suffering. Yeah.
that's
We're
a
taking
little
whatever
bit
you
of a
get.
big burden. If somebody
Yeah.
like shows up and I treat like about as many therapy clients as coaching clients. So if somebody's like, I hate life because I've been through real trauma and tragedy and I hate myself. I'm not going to say, well, I don't respect that. Get out. But for a coaching client who wants to do something, I want to respect what they're going to do. You
Right.
know.
Well, this was some of the criticisms of mindfulness, that it was starting to be used as a tool for, unhelpful things. Like you could use any one of these tools in a non-compassionate way, in a way for, people to,
Yeah.
make more money for themselves, right? Whatever. So you work with people who you can get behind, and they, the power of these practices in opening people up and supporting their work. So that's, anyways, it's just a,
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting, like feudal systems that had a class of subsistence dirt farmers and another class of people who were scholars living in, you know, relatively speaking, a palace relative to like a hut. Like you could say, oh, that's maintaining something unfair. Like there's real ethical, like using mindfulness to like
mm-hmm,
feed the big bad.
mm-hmm,
And then there's like people who are a part of a system and we could wait for that system to change for one that's more idyllic to us or ideal to our sensibilities. Or we could get in there and try to like be a force for positive change for the world that we're actually in. Not about
right,
generalizing.
right.
Also, these are the people who showed up at the door, which is really funny because that's like a trust. Like if I were in Newcastle, I would say, I've got a great idea about working with people who are in the coal industry. And if I were like, knew a bunch of people who were gymnasts, I'd be like, this is really great for teaching gymnasts. I just kind of try to follow what path is
What
right in
comes
front
from,
of me.
yeah, well, it's the same thing that's happened to me. You could just look at my practice in it. There's a large percentage of them that are business owners, they're
Sure.
CEOs, they're sort of these high performing folks that are struggling with some area of their life, something that feels out of alignment, something that feels off, or maybe even questioning their own high performance. Like, now that I'm here, now what? And or something falls apart on them. That's actually the reason why they come to me, is like their marriage falls apart, their health falls apart, their living situation, their kid, something falls apart, and they are now groundless, even though they have succeeded and achieved so much. But the way in which they went about success and achievement doesn't seem to work with this thing. So they need a new set of tools. Yeah.
So wonderful, that observation. And when you mention recovery, which is something really important, I know to both of us, like the addiction to self or the addiction to succeeding or the addiction to the illusion of boundless wealth, the illusion of separateness, that's a powerful addiction. And eventually people hit the wall, and to free ourselves from, that's it's so dharmic and so in the core of like Sufism and Kabbalah and esoteric Christianity, all wisdom traditions really. Neurotic craving and that thirst for more and more and the falling in love with the self concept and the terror of old age, sickness, and death, those things, contending with that's the real stuff. And when you can contend with that, that's like a whole other order of freedom from suffering.
Oh, yeah. It's a whole other order of freedom from suffering. And then we get caught up in it again.
Yeah. Until the next
And
time.
then you free yourself again and you get caught up in it. We're just in a sea of lots of hooks for that right now, especially if you're a high achiever. So, okay. Well, thank you, Dennis. I could talk to you forever. And what a sweet opportunity to talk about these concepts. And I hope people got something out of our, like you and I were jiving on it. We're simpatico, but I really am super excited to read your work in this area, because it does seem like such a rich place for you to bring compassion and ACT together in this area of investing in high performance and achievement, and so well needed and received. So thank you for doing this work, and good luck with your adventures in writing.
Oh, thanks so much. And thanks for everything that you do and the path that you are demonstrating for people of how to like really live these things, not just have them on a cushion or a therapy session or a yoga mat, but how to live these principles. And you really do a great job of modeling that and bringing it into the world. And it's always a pleasure to spend some time together.
Thank you. It's fun to see your daughter on Instagram.
She's hilarious. I'm going to go
She's cute.
wrestle with her right now. And
love of your life. That's what you say every time. Love is of my life. What's your line? You say,
I say love of my lives, because it's a little
love
nod to, it's either like reminding me of like that all lives are a part of a flow of like many lives that we have, all of reincarnation. Or maybe I can't even bear to think of the sweetness of this life.
Love of my lives. I love it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Effort podcast. Wise Effort is about you taking your energy and putting it in the places that matter most to you. And when you do so, you'll get to savor the good of your life along the way. If you would like to become a member of the Wise Effort podcast, go to wiseeffort.com. And if you like this episode and think it would be helpful to somebody, please leave a review over at Podchaser. I would like to thank my team, my partner in all things, including the producer of this podcast, Craig, Ashley Hyatt, the podcast manager, and thank you to Ben Gold at Bell and Branch for our music. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and it's not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatments.